Presentation by Dr. Erik Villard from the U.S. Army Center of Military History, who will introduce in more depth following me. After that, there'll be a period for question and answers geared towards the veterans here asking questions of Dr. Villard about what he presents everyone. And then around 11:30 or 12, depending on the presentation length and the question and answer length, we'll start lunch. That's available in Cole Park Commons Theory. It's a buffet style for $12 a person, and you're welcome to come back in here and eat that. This is where we'll have the most seating. We have this room the entire day. At about 1300, we'll start the Oliver North War Stories video, the real story of Hamburger Hill episode. We'll watch that, and then there'll be a period of question and answer, and that's geared more towards the soldiers asking questions of the veterans and veterans sharing stories of their experiences. After that, at about 14:30, 14:45, the soldiers will move out of here, and then over to Hangar 3, and then the veterans will follow them, and the buses will be available for you guys to move over to Hangar 3. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Greg.
All right, this is getting to be a regular thing, me stand up and talking to all you guys. Thanks again to everybody for being here, and most importantly, I think I've said it a few times already, thanks to all of our veterans who I know have traveled from all corners of the United States to be here on this very special week. And if I haven't said enough, I will repeat it. Let me be very clear. Everything that we are doing here this week, to include the things that we're doing next week, is for you. And I hope that you benefit from it in your own way, because I promise you that the soldiers sitting out here in this crowd also benefit from it. I had dozens upon dozens of soldiers from the battalion come and ask and talk to us yesterday and say how much they appreciated the time that they get to spend with you guys, and how it makes this place, continues to make this place different from anywhere else they've ever been. And frankly, that's exactly what we're doing here this morning with Dr. Villard's presentation. This morning, he and I were talking about the importance of history. And it's become a little less trendy as of late. And I don't know why, but I think that's a big mistake. And I can tell you, we're trying to right that wrong here in the Iron Renaissance. And it started yesterday with the dedication of blackjacks. And if you walk in that room and you see history on the walls, it's an opportunity to learn. It's an opportunity to discuss. And if you're there with your friends, if you're there with your coworkers, if you're there with your chain of command, or if you're there with veterans, ideally, it's an opportunity for you to look at those pictures and say, hey, what was going on then? Tell me about that. How can I learn from that? And how can we make ourselves a better warfighting unit today? Because we all know, everybody in this room knows, that that is what the 3rd Battalion is all about, warfighting. That's our job, and that will never change. And one of the ways that we make ourselves better, and one of the ways we make ourselves more ready to do that, is by spending time with the veterans who've gone before us. You guys endured many of the things that we're learning today. As a young lieutenant, a young captain myself, oftentimes I would have an experience in Iraq, Afghanistan, or Kosovo, and I'd think, oh wow, this is new, and you turn around and you read a history book that's not very hard to find, you say, no, these guys did that exact thing in Vietnam, or they did that exact thing in Korea. So fast forward 20 years, and here we are today, we're going to continue to learn from the history of those who have gone before us. And I can tell you there's no one better postured to help us do that than Dr. Villard. He is the resident expert on the history of Vietnam for the Center for Military History. Dr. Villard holds a PhD. He's deployed twice. He's spent time walking the ground in Afghanistan. We talked about it. He's spent time with the troops on the ground in Afghanistan. He's been to Kuwait. So he knows what it's like to be a soldier out there in a combat zone. He understands what that feels like. And his level of expertise and his knowledge today will help us close that gap and reestablish that foundation for the importance of history going forward. And we're damn glad to have him here. So without further ado, let me introduce Dr. Erik Villard.
This is a great honor and privilege to be speaking with all of you, the veterans and the active duty soldiers and families who are important as well, right? They're part of the support group. So thank you for all being here today. Just a little background on myself. I am now the official title I have is Digital military historian for the Center of Military History. I've had that position for about 3 years. But the title that I had before and that I continue to hold and I am most proud of is Vietnam War expert for the Army. I have worked at Center of Military History since 2000. I was hired about 6 months after finishing my PhD program at the University of Washington in Seattle. And in most of that time, I have been focused on Vietnam War. I published a book last year, the third volume in our official series on the Vietnam War, called Staying the Course, which covers the period from October 67 to September 68. So it is the period in the lead up to the Tet Offensive, covers the Tet Offensive, and then covers the period afterwards, the May Offensive, the August Offensive, and going right up to the time where you have the presidential elections, the question of where's the war going to go. So that's been one of my big endeavors. But in addition to doing that, I have on my own time conducted a lot of outreach to get information for veterans. So about 5 years ago, I started a Facebook group called Vietnam War History Org, which now has 33,000 members. It's the largest serious history group in social media, and I'm incredibly proud of it. And it's given me an opportunity to learn from veterans, Vietnam veterans, and subject matter experts. And so many of the great relationships I've developed has been through that. So it was through the Facebook group, for example, that I met Frank Botcher. He joined early. I saw his name. I went, holy cow, I know who that is. So got him to be on my advisory board, and so he became an integral part of that group. Also, a member of the advisory board was a fantastic lady named Marjorie Hanson. That's how they met and got married. Through my Facebook group. So, I feel very proud of that. So, the two of them, in fact, I brought them I invited them, they came to Ottawa in 2015 for Society for Military History Conference. And they were the rock stars, believe me. And so we set up there and had a booth, and it was about Hamburger Hill. And in between people coming by to talk to him, the two of us sat together with my Google Earth map system and went over that thing, like, point by point. Because there was issues that he still had with the way the official reports had turned out. So we went through that, and so I've really gotten the benefit of his experience. So some of what you're getting today really is from Frank, and I do this partly in his honor. So what I want to do is kind of give you a high to low view to try to put this into context for you. And some of this information hopefully is stuff that you don't know, but this will hopefully kind of explain how it was that the Rocky Sons came to be on that hill in May of 1969. These things don't happen by accident, and there was a reason. So I want to go through some of that today with you. All right, so the first thing to know about the war and the backstory is the strategic context. Early in the conflict, and we're talking really 1959 before the war really begins, per se, North Vietnam decides that they are going to embark on supporting an armed uprising, an unarmed war in the South, to support the Viet Cong guerrillas, right? The South Vietnamese communists. In order to do this, they need to create a logistical system to get troops and equipment and ammunition from the north down to the south. And the key part of this is what became known as the Ho Chi Minh Trail. That's a bit of a misnomer. I think it brings to mind guys in backpacks going down a little path. In fact, it develops over time, but what it really is, it's a system of roads that were built during the French Indochinese colonial period throughout Laos and Cambodia, North Vietnam. What they're doing is they're bringing supplies from the north, going around through Laos using this road system, and then using those old colonial roads to bring those supplies to the border and then cross the border. So what you see here on the left is kind of the overall network supplying those spaces in the country, and on the right is a Google Earth snapshot focusing in the I-Corps area. Now the thing to remember, keep in mind here is the terrain in Vietnam. The terrain is destiny. You have this incredibly rugged mountain range in that part of the world, in that part of the country. Those mountain ranges tend to run from north to south, so they're going like this. There's only a few places, natural places, that go create a lateral east to west corridor. So what you find in this war is there's about 5 or 6 places in South Vietnam where you have fighting all of the time. And that's because that is the natural infiltration routes. That's the way you can get from Laos or Cambodia to South Vietnam relatively easily. Because these guys are carrying supplies, they're not just going up and down mountains, they're not just going anywhere. It's like, almost like the best way to put it, it's like a drug network going across the border, right? There's very carefully planned routes. There are drop locations. You walk for 10 miles and then you rest. And so these things are all very carefully planned. And one of the key crossing point areas leads to this place called the A Shau Valley. Now the A Shau Valley is this deep rift in the mountain range in the interior of Toi Tien province. And this will become really sort of the theater for the 101st in the Vietnam War. So this is, again, a little hard to see with this map, but what I've basically done is I've taken this North Vietnamese infiltration map and then overlaid it on Google Earth. But the point to be made here is that you sort of see those circle areas. It's a system, and again, it's the overall group is called the 559th group because it was created on May 1959, so 5th month 1959. That's why it was named that. The system is they have these what they call Binh Trams, which are like logistical commands at various points along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So you have the movement of supplies either by bicycle or by truck from one point to another, generally like about as far as you can drive in a day, or usually drive at night. And then they will move those supplies, put them to the next area. And these Binh Trams are also responsible for things like security, rebuilding the road because the Americans are bombing these trails in Laos. And so there's going to be, in particular, this Binh Tram 42, which is this logistical center in the A Shau Valley. And for the, after 1966, when North Vietnamese forces overrun the Special Forces camp, there was a A Shau Special Forces camp there, which is basically a handful of American Special Forces guys and some Montagnard irregulars. And again, there's no way they're able to stave off the North Vietnamese forces. From about March of '66, for the next 2 years, North Vietnamese control that valley, right? Occasionally, you'll have Americans fly over and bomb, but really is no intelligence. And so the North Vietnamese have free reign, and they build this place up. They stock the valley with supplies and repair facilities, and it becomes a very important way station. And the more they build these supplies up in the A Shau Valley, the more dangerous it becomes for the Allied forces along the coast. In this part of the country, most of the population lives in a pretty thin strip of land in the flatlands along the coast. It's where they grow the rice, where people live. The interior 8% are basically mountains, not many people live there. But by creating this logistical area of the Ashau Valley, it puts the North Vietnamese within, a day's or two march of those lowlands. So their main force units that are operating the lowlands are getting supplied through here. So obviously this is going to be a major problem for the Allies. They need to solve this. If they don't, then no amount of pacification is ever going to protect those lowland areas. So those red circles you see, those are the named base areas. This is the way MACD did it. They would have designations for them. So the ones in Laos are in the 600 series, 607, those are across the border. But you see there like 101 and 114, those are base areas in South Vietnam. Now, understanding this is going to be a huge problem, General Westmoreland embarks on a long-term strategy to deal with this. And so his plan is in 1967, this is what he wants to do. He wants to free up the 1st Cavalry Division, right, which is the premier air mobile unit at the time. It had 450 helicopters, right? It was capable of going anywhere. It was capable of striking these remote areas. So he wants to consolidate this unit and bring it up to I Corps. And in a series of operations in York, just kind of march up the border and beat up on those NVA supply areas, including the Ashau Valley. He also wants to build up that Marine base at Khe Sanh, right, which is up there sort of near the DMZ. And he wants to do this because if he's given permission, he wants to cut the Ho Chi Minh Trail. That's the place to do it. Because Route 9 goes into Laos and is a natural invasion route. So he wants to build up this base, and it will be the 1st Cav going across. 1st Cav and who else? 101st, right? That's his other exploitation force. Now the 1st Brigade has been in theater since '65. And 1st Brigade has been running around clearing, securing areas, being a fire brigade, going where the action is hottest. But as the war continues to escalate and as Westmoreland's plans developed, he's bringing the whole division. So this is in November and December of 1967 that the 2nd and 3rd Brigades of the 101st fly from Campbell to South Vietnam in an operation called Eagle Thrust, which was the largest deployment of soldiers of that time in the war. These are C-141s taken off and bringing them. These are not going on troop ships, not on Pan Am. These are military airlift. So they bring them to South Vietnam. Now the 2nd and 3rd Brigades actually go to 3 Corps first, not up to this part of the country. Because Westmoreland isn't ready, and logistics isn't ready to support all those troops. So under the command of General Garsanti, who was the division commander, they actually bring them to this area around Saigon in 3 Corps. So the 3rd Brigade, the Rakkasans, they set up in a place called Phuoc Vinh, which is about 50 clicks north of Saigon, on the edge of this place called War Zone D. Now, War Zone D is just this massive wilderness area that the enemy uses as a base area and a staging area for attacks in Saigon. And in fact, the 3rd Brigade, the Rakkasans, will stay there until almost the end of 1968. So for the first year, they're actually fighting in 3 Corps, and that's a whole other story worth, a discussion. And maybe, some other time, some other year, we'll have that. But again, getting back to Westmoreland's idea, he wants to get those troops up to the north as quickly as possible. So he does send the 2nd Brigade, the 101st, up there. He's getting the 1st Cavalry, so he's getting those troops in place. Again, the idea being conduct those work operations, and then probably in the late summer of '68, given the authority, launch that cross-border operation, cut the Ho Chi Minh Trail. That's the idea. Of course, the enemy gets his vote, right? Always. So this is around the same time that Hanoi is devising its own plan. Now, it's been fighting the Americans, head on for over 2 years now. But the war has become a stalemate. So Laiswan, who is really the guy running the North Vietnamese government, it's not Ho Chi Minh. I mean, Ho Chi Minh is very sick, very old. He's basically retired. So it's this guy Laiswan, who's a real firebrand. He's a real ideologue. He comes up with this idea, what's actually an old idea, called a general offensive, general uprising. This is actually not a new idea. This has been something that the communists have been wanting to do for the last 5 or 6 years. The idea being, commit your conventional forces in an attack against the cities to paralyze the government and their security forces so the popular uprising can happen, and then you shadow the government. So this is a surgical strike. This is what he wants to do to knock the war off a stalemate. And in I-Corps, this takes the form of a diversion before the attacks. The siege of Khe Sanh, right, which begins early January, surrounding those Marines. 2 Paladin divisions circle about 6,000 Marines in the Khe Sanh combat base. Now, Hanoi's thinking is that is actually the diversion for Tet. And you may have heard it differently, but their objective wasn't to pull in more American forces. Because they know what Americans, they can move anywhere, right? Within a day, they can move a whole brigade. So isn't to draw American forces away from the cities, it's to draw the South Vietnamese Strategic Reserve away from the cities. Your counterparts, the South Vietnamese Airborne Battalions, right, which were the best units in the country, those are the units that would be most likely to defeat the communists in the cities. So by attacking Khe Sanh, they wanted to pull those strategic forces away from the capital and other places. And in fact, they do manage to suck several of them up there. And there's, in fact, another one waiting on the tarmac in Saigon when the Tet Offensive happens. So that's the diversion for Tet, but right before the Tet Offensive happens, which really begins on the 30th, 31st January, because one of their big objectives is the city of Hue, down by the coast, they actually take one of their best units from Khe Sanh and quickly march it down to Hue. That's the 29th Paladin Regiment, unit you're probably familiar with. So that unit sneaks down, so when the Battle of Hue begins, they're actually set up on the outskirts of the capital. There we go. And so there is a kind of a schematic showing the Battle of Hue. So you've got the 29th set up in this place, a village called Tamnachu, which is their headquarters. And you've got several other units. You've got the 6th Paladin Regiment, which is a unit you will see again. You've got the 9th Paladin Regiment, which is a unit you will see again. And then several other Paladin regiments. So this becomes, as we all know, a right cluster, you know what. This battle lasts for 25 days. The enemy gets in the city. They control most of the citadel. It's a nightmare, right? Most of the city is destroyed. Again, it takes over 3 weeks to get them out. They finally cut off the supply route at Tanlachu, and in fact, you have a couple 101st Airborne Battalions from the 2nd Brigade who help retake that. And Ronnie Joe Hooper wins the medal, receives the Medal of Honor for his fighting there. So after this, the Allies are determined never to let this happen again. Right? This is what happens when you leave a place like the Ashau Valley unmolested for 2 years, right? Because those attacking units that got into Hue are coming right out of those hills from Ashau. They're getting all their supplies, all their weapons, everything else from that route. So the determination is never again. So what happens? You have a series of operations over the next year or so designed to prevent that. So the first operations are Delaware and Carentan. So 101st Carentan. Carentan is a security operation for Hue. It is because the city was attacked. So the 101st, again, 1st and 2nd Brigades, and it's rounded out by 3rd Brigade, the 82nd, which was actually operating under the 101st, if that matters to some of you. So it's a 3-brigade operation to secure those lowlands, and part of what you're doing in Carentan is not just securing the lowlands, but opening that road which leads to the Ashaw Valley, Route 547, right? So that's what the 101st is doing in these months of 68. And this is where you see the creation of these fire bases like Bastogne and Veghel and Birmingham. They're marching that direction to eventually open up a road. Meanwhile, the 1st Cavalry Division actually goes into the valley, Operation Delaware. Goes in there, starts cleaning out the supply caches, takes out the AAA. They've got like 37mm anti-aircraft guns by now. So it's nasty when they first go in, but they basically crack it open. So again, you see here, you have the establishment of some of these fire bases you will become familiar with that they originally done during this time in 68. And then, so after that, the rainy season comes, but then in August, the 101st conducts a follow-on operation called Somerset Plain. And they go into the Ashaw Valley to make sure to see, what's going on. Again, the North Vietnamese are coming back. So the idea, the decision is, we have to go there in force, and we're going to have to stay there for a while, right? We can't just hop in there every once in a while. We're going to have to really make a stand. So they begin gearing up for really sustained operations. And this kind of gets us to where our story picks up in earnest. So you see here in early 69, you've got a series of operations. It's not just the 101st, but it's also the 3rd Marine Division, operating up and down from the DMZ down to the Ashaw Valley. So everything that the 101st and the Rampasons are doing, you've got Marines and Army troops to the north supporting you. By this time in early 69, the 3rd Brigade of the 101st has come up now. So the whole division is together. It's operating together. The 1st Cavalry Division has gone back down. So now this is Screaming Eagles territory, and will be for the next 3 years. This is Trois Tien Province and the 101st are like that for the next 3 years. So the first of these operations you see is Massachusetts Striker, which kind of is working on the southern end of the valley. So by April and May of 69, as a patch of snow comes up, what do you have? Okay, the combined effect of these operations is the Allied troops have now hammered all of those obvious infiltration routes, right? Those roads, those old colonial roads that have gone across, the ones that are really nice, those are shut down. They can work through, bomb, patrol. There's fire bases now in the Ashaw Valley. The North Vietnamese are finding it very, very difficult to operate in the valley, much less in the lowlands. Remember when Hue was attacked during the Tet Offensive. During the May Offensive, they got as far as Tom Chu. And again, it was 101st Airborne troops that fought them off in May. August, didn't get anywhere near the city. So the 29th Pavan, which had been fighting in Hue, is now being pushed back and back and back. In fact, it goes to the north to be retrained because there's nothing for it to do. So this is the situation. The enemy, I use that term professionally, is looking for a way to punch through this defensive system. And there's Dewey Canyon. You see them. Just give credit to the Marines because they're doing their part, while the 101st is working on its chunk of the Ashaw. This is truly combined joint operations. Okay, so this brings us to Apache Snow. This is a screenshot. I wish I could show you this in actual moving life, but what I've done is I've taken these military maps and it's enhanced with Photoshop, and it's skinned them on Google Earth. So now you can see the terrain in 3D from any angle, from any elevation. And then I created custom icons. So you can see the location of all the fire bases, all the rivers, all the units, everything you need. So this is how I have come to understand the war. It's just how my mind works. I mean, I'm a gamer from way back, right? And if you're playing, these sorts of, RTS games, you're like, yeah, that really makes sense. Why can't I do that for history? Well, you can. Well, at least I did. So this is an example of that. And what you're actually seeing here is a shaded terrain relief map from Google Maps. Screenshotted it and put it on Google Earth, because you can see the terrain much better. So what you're seeing here is the valley in the middle, and you see that purple line up to the north, that's 922. That's the main road they used to use. That's pretty much been shut down. So what's left? What's left is sort of in the middle here. Let me see if I can do through here. It's a river. It's a winding river, right, which is going across the border. The rivers are great if you don't have, advanced communication, because you just follow the river and you're going to get where you're going to go. And that's what the North Vietnamese are doing. What they're doing is they're crossing over, and then right around here, they're splitting off and developing these old mountaineer trails to move into the center part of the valley, the area around Hill 937. So they're looking for a new route when Apache Snow opens. So when the American forces begin gearing up, the North Vietnamese realize that they're going to have to fight for this. So 29th Regiment has come back down from North Vietnam. It's fully fitted. It's got 1,600 men, fresh, well-trained, motivated. This unit is coming for a fight, and it decides, okay, the Americans are coming. Let's choose a place. So they recon in late April, where are we going to fight? They find this place, Hill 937, which for their purposes is ideal. And it's just across the border from Laos, so they can pull back if they need to, but that's the place that they're going to stand and fight. And it is that 100%. They're expecting the Americans to show up, and they're going to fight basically as long as they possibly can. So, here you see, again, a sort of closer view of the terrain and those little paths. On 11 May, you have 5 airborne battalions dropping in along that sector, right? 3 American from the 101st, the 2 ARVN. And the initial idea, and a lot of you don't need to be told this, the initial idea is once you land there, start spreading out and look for enemy trails, for signs of supply caches, but basically you're sniffing. You know that there's someone there, but you just don't know exactly where. So this is where, getting down to Hill 937, I decided to use a little creative license to help explain the battle, because if you look at it top down, it's a map. I mean, it's just squiggly lines, kind of hard to visualize. So what I did was, I came up with this idea, and there you see with the purple lines and stuff, that's Hill 937. Looking at it from the top, I thought, that's kind of like a constellation. So what I've done is I've drawn like a stick figure. I call it the spear thrower. So what you have is you have a guy with his right arm raised, his left arm pointing, and his legs splayed out. So when you see this battle over the next couple of days, that's sort of how I'm describing it. It's essentially like a 4-armed starfish. And you'll see why it was such an ideal place to defend. All right, so I've thrown in I've taken some of these photos and enhanced them so you can see a little bit. So this is looking across the valley towards Laos. And there in that middle portion, that's that spine ridge, which is Hill 937. It's really almost like a razorback ridge than a single hill as you would understand it. And there's a closer view, again, looking towards Laos, with the crest of Hill 937 right in the middle, and then off to the left, that little smaller peak, That's Hill 916, which is part of the NVA defensive system, and is a big part of the battle with the 506th Infantry. All right, so here's something that you may find interesting. So looking through all the after-action reports and looking for the maps that will help me tell the story, so I found this one map of the NVA bunker system that the Americans drew after the battle. You know, black and white paper. So I lifted that, enhanced with Photoshop, turned it red, created a transparency, and then put it on top of the map. So what you're seeing, those red lines, that is the NVA bunker system that they built before the Americans arrived. So when the 3rd of the 182nd lands there, you see the defenses as they stood facing it. Now, some of these fortifications on the hill had been there for a year or two. But this NVA regiment moves onto the hill about 10 or 11 days before the battle, and they furiously improve things. And one of the things that they're doing is they're building these A-frame bunkers, right? So you take these 6-foot-long logs, right, and tunnel into the hill and then like that, and then do a dog leg. So that means if you're getting bombed from the top, it's going to basically pack that down. It won't collapse it, right? It's going to pack down those A-frames. And you've got that dog leg, so if you need to, hide from shrapnel, you just go around the corner. Pretty easy thing to do. I talked to some of my, the people I know in Vietnam, former North Vietnamese, and I'm like, yeah, we can crank these things out in a day or two. So the whole hill is lined with these things. So you see when they land here, fortunately it's not on top of the bunker system, but there's a whole line facing the Americans before they get to the top. So this is kind of the situation we have on the 10th and 11th. You have about 800 North Vietnamese soldiers on Hill 937 and 916. You've got another 700 that are running around at the base of the hill. And this is a standard NVA tactic they use throughout the war. Hold positions at the top of the hill, because the Americans are wanting to get up there. But they keep mobile forces at the bottom, right? To run around and hit them from behind. And this is kind of where the title of my talk comes from, once more as before. If you are familiar with the Battle of Dak To, November 67, right? This is the Central Highlands, the 173rd Airborne attacks up this hill, right? And there's NVA in the top. They get about halfway up the hill, and they're facing resistance, so they're stymied. Whole NVA battalion comes behind them from the rear and attacks them. So they're trapped on the hill. And of course, it's very touch and go, and I think something you're going to appreciate too. You have a friendly fire episode where a Marine A4 drops a 250-pound bomb on the 173rd perimeter, killing 42 men, in addition to all the other casualties they've taken. So again, this is like Hill 875 on steroids. Much bigger enemy force, much steeper terrain, much stronger defenses. So again, the Americans have never seen anything like this that I can tell in the whole war. They never will again. So as the 3rd 187 begins sending its companies out, right? A company down to the river, D company around the left, C staying put for the time being, B's going down. Within, again, a day or two, start hitting those bunker systems, right? Just trying to move along that spine and then take a right to get to the top of the hill. And you see the problem, right? You're advancing along that narrow spine. The trail is only, 10 feet wide, maybe, and there's just jungle and it drops away. The enemy knows where you're coming. They have the high ground. It's not really possible to simply go think, but there's bunker systems on either side. So if you go off the trail, you run into those bunker systems. And if you go down into the valley, which we end up doing, you've got those two arms on either side, and the enemy, you're getting shot at from 3 sides at once. So you see why it was such an ideal position for the North Vietnamese. And this is another photo of the hill But this is showing you kind of the perspective from which the Rakkasans were attacking. Kind of off from the left here, towards the top hill. That's the main axis of attack of the Rakkasans. And you can't really see it as well here, but sort of in this area right here, that was a place that became known as the clearing. Right? That was an area where the vegetation was much lower and more spread out than the higher elevations where you had the trees. So you're entering this auditorium being shot at from 3 sides and going up an incline which in some cases is 70 degrees. I mean, it's just, again, absolute nightmare. And so it takes a couple days for the Americans to figure out, to sort of develop the situation, realize that it's not just a company. I mean, maybe not just a battalion, it's a whole regiment we're facing. So this is another view, and Colonel Honeycutt's LZ would be somewhere in here, and so again, the advance is along this ridge, but then increasingly up through this clearing area, looking for a way past the enemy defenses. So this is about 5 days in when it's pretty clear that 1 battalion isn't going to be enough. So they bring the 1st of the 506, which has been doing its own sweep to the south, tell it to start marching north to come to their aid. Well, when they do, you see Hill 916, right, which is another mini Hamburger Hill right there. So for those of you kind of wondering, well, where were those guys? They were involved in their own problems trying to come to your aid. Now, even so, with 2 American battalions, by the 15th and 16th, the Americans are actually making some progress. The commander on the hill, the enemy commander on the hill, is starting to really worry. He's like, look, the Americans have cut my supply line to Laos. We're starting to run short of ammunition. We've taken casualties. What do we do? And the regimental commander says, you stay. You stay, you fight, you die. We're gonna see this thing through. Ho Chi Minh's birthday is coming up, and by gosh, we're gonna do him proud. So their political commissars on the hill, tell the fighters, this is it. This is the place where we're gonna hold our ground. So ultimately, what happens is you get a 3rd American battalion and an Army battalion. You finally actually encircle the hill, right? And you attack simultaneously from all sides. And finally on the 29th, you do take the hill. Over those last 2 days, the 29th regiment begins just kind of disintegrating, right? And some of the soldiers, some of you remember this, running down the hill, trying to get away to Laos. There are others who are either told or decide they're going to stay behind. They're going to fight to the death to try to hold off the Americans as long as possible. But by this point, on the North Vietnamese side, their casualties are really enormous. These bunkers that they built to hold ammunition and weapons, most of that ammunition and weapons are gone, and they're just stacked with their own bodies like cordwood. This is about as extreme conditions as you could possibly imagine. And again, it reminds you a lot of Pacific War and World War II. This is like a Suribachi, right? This is like a Japanese cave system where they determined to fight to the end. Most times in the Vietnam War, the enemy sides to fight. Okay, we're going to fight for a certain amount of time, a couple hours a day, and then we're leaving. You almost never. It's almost unheard of that you stand there for 10 days and fight. So again, this is another reason why this is such an unusual battle that again shows their desperation to punch a hole in the defensive shield that the 101st had created in the A Shau Valley. That's why they're so desperate to do this. Of course they want to, cause political controversy in the United States, but that's never their chief objective. They're never thinking, we're going to get the media to start, complaining and stuff. It's nice, but they're thinking operationally. They're thinking, if we don't do this, we're not going to get another chance. We've got this completely fresh regiment. And what are we going to do? Pull it halfway? No, we're going to see this thing through. Well, what happens? Enemy casualties are again hard to determine, but up to 800 are killed or permanently incapacitated. So half the force is eliminated. And then there's others that are, of course, badly wounded. So this regiment is destroyed and will not come back into action for at least another year. Now, this is significant because there are two other NBA regiments in the Valley, the 6th and the 9th. And some of you, fortunately, faced them in places like Airborne, right, where they attacked FBI Airborne or Burgess Garden. So they're capable of doing those sort of raids, but they were weakened forces. They didn't have the ability to stand and fight. 29th did, 29th lost. So after this, you have, there's the hill after the battle. I mean, the amount of ordnance is unbelievable. I mean, you have tactical airstrikes coming in constantly, 1,000-pound delayed fuse bombs. You've got Cobra helicopters with, the rocket firing. You've got, artillery coming in. Just the amount of ordnance is unbelievable. So it's also been said that sometimes that, after the Americans took the hill, they left it, they abandoned it. Not true. Now, the 3rd of the 187th gets pulled out. You've been through a lot, right? So you get taken out of lowlands, but the other 101st, they stay. Operation continues. And in fact, this is the hill in like the July time frame. They actually built a road to the top of the hill and put tanks on top of it. The 3rd and the 5th Cavalry and the 2nd and 34th Army, they drove all the way from 547, right? That road that the 101st had reopened, into the Ashow Valley and right up to the top of Hill 930. Now, if that isn't a big, thumb in the nose of the enemy, I'm not sure what is, and not always recognized. So again, the Americans didn't leave the hill. Now, the hill itself was not important. True. But the destruction of the 29th Regiment absolutely was, because with that, they did not have any more maneuver forces to contest the Americans. And so basically for the next year, they have no ability to use the Ashow Valley. And their histories say, this is the darkest time for us. This is when our, forces in the lowlands, don't have enough ammunition to fight. They don't have enough weapons. They don't have replacements. They're spending all their time hiding. Why is that important? Those main force units can't fight. The pacification can make progress, right? That's when you're working with the villagers and the hamlet, you're developing security, doing civic action. You need to do the first thing before you can do the second, right? So by doing what you did, you bought time for all those folks to work with the people, and you needed to have the two work together, and it did work. The North Vietnamese docs are very clear about that. They even used an expression like, before, where it would take, one person a week to get supplies of lowlands, now it took 7 people 3 weeks to get half the amount. So this is, from an operational point of view, absolutely a success. And so there again is the sign that was put on the hill. It has been known as Hamburger Hill ever since. And again, Hill 937 is in meters, Dong Apia is the Vietnamese name. We can talk about the controversy if you like. Of course, as the battle's happening, there's some AP reports talking about the intensity of the fighting. And again, for most Americans who were not there, it is kind of hard to wrap your head around, well, what's this all about, right? Vietnamization is going to happen soon. The Americans are going to start pulling their forces back from Vietnam, I mean, gradually, but that's coming. Why are we losing, 60 plus Americans in this little speck of hill along the border? That seems, from their point of view, that seems insane. Not understanding what I just told you. about how that fits into the operational and the campaign objectives. So that's where you have Edward Kennedy, Senator Edward Kennedy, get on the floor and basically say, General Zayce is an idiot, and he's using frontal tactics, and he should have done this, and all the second guessing is nuts. Because as you saw, there is no good way to take that hill. There is no good way. You have to fight your way through. You have to use, combined arms. You have to use all the ingenuity you can. But it comes down, especially in a fight like this, the grit of the American individual soldier. It's the initiative, determination, the will. And that's what it was. And that's the way you have to win some of these battles. And that's what they did. So, again, I'd be happy to answer questions, on those or any other points. But again, I just want to leave you with the idea that this battle was, again, the defining moment in the 101st and the Rock-Croissants. It achieved its objectives, and it achieved its objectives in a way that had a measurable difference in the way the war was developing. And I think almost more importantly, it's established a tradition that you have today and will always have. So thank you very much.
Okay, as we talked about earlier, now's the time for questions and answers. I've got some mobile microphones around the room. I think there's a microphone maybe in the middle. So anyone that's got a question, whether you're a current Rock-Croissant or generations of Rock-Croissants past, by all means, raise your hand. Dr. Villard will call on you, and he's happy to address any questions you have.
How did the Battle of Hamburger Hill affect the Paris peace talks?
Well, the talks were fitfully underway. They weren't really serious at this point. They were still sort of, arguing about the dimensions of the table and who sat where. I think the important thing to recognize is that by May '69, both sides of the war had changed strategies. The North Vietnamese, right, and I mentioned this strategy of general offensive, general uprising that they had initiated in early '68. So that's Tet, and then they do it again in May, right, and they do it again in August, and they do it again in Tet '69, February '69. After that, because they get diminishing returns every time, right? And they're able to accomplish less and less. And their own soldiers are starting to get sort of peeved, let us say. You actually have the first unit defections among the communists during this period. You have high-level defections. Lazuan actually has to come down from Hanoi to argue with his own commanders, that why they should keep these offensives going. So after Tet of '69, North Vietnam decides to rescind their general offensive policy. So they fall back to what they call the fight talk phase, where it's negotiations, and they'll launch occasional attacks to keep the pressure on, kind of see what Nixon does. The Americans, again, for their part, have essentially decided that the withdrawal phase will begin. In fact, that decision had essentially been made at the end of '67. That had always been the plan. I just want to make this clear. The plan was never to keep 500,000 American troops in South Vietnam for 10 years or something. That was never the idea. The idea was always to do a build-up, get in the punches, create some breathing room, and then do a gradual drawdown. So that had already, decision had been made behind the scenes. So, not knowing that, looking at Hamburger Hill, some people have taken, after Hamburger Hill, I've heard this from something like, Nixon told Abrams, okay, that's it, no more offensive operations, that's save casualties. Bump. That's not true. You don't save casualties by sitting back in your hooches. I think most of you know that. You have to continue to do the things that you do in order to achieve your objective. We hadn't changed the objective. We hadn't said, we're going to leave South Vietnam and leave it up to the communists. No, that hadn't changed at all. So the 101st keeps doing what it's doing. Whenever the NVA show up, you fight them, right? Fire-based whipcord, June of 1970. This is a year later. Another boom, 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 boom in the Aisha Valley. So this whole idea of, we're just gonna, Hamburger Hill, that was too bloody, we're gonna change strategies, that's not true. So again, from a diplomatic point of view, of course, Hanoi always, lauds its, apparent victories. But again, you kind of lose credibility when in every single battle you're slaughtering 3,000 Americans, and they're like there was only a company there in the first place. You know what I mean? So the credibility kind of goes away, and I think the same thing was true. I mean, it's funny, the North Vietnamese history of the battle. Apparently, from their point of view, the battle ends on the 17th, with the Americans leaving the hill. Oh, really? I didn't know that. But the North Vietnamese, or People's Army, sometimes do that. Like when they don't really like the way the story turned out, they'll just, okay, well then, and then they'll be like, hand wave. They do the same thing with the Battle of the Way. So again, if that's an explanation, it doesn't actually have, a significance. And honestly, I mean, the power of branding, if you didn't have Hamburger Hill, if somebody had nailed that up and someone had reported that, I mean, would we be here today? I don't know. So like I said, sometimes certain stories, take fire, and like, who remembers the attack at Airborne? I mean, we do, but who else does, right? And that was nasty. So, yeah. Other questions?
Go ahead, John.
For the benefit of those that are here, for the benefit of those here, we never saw any reporters outside of that, the Blackjack LZ. They may talk about how the intensity on the hill was and how the fighting was, but that was all picked up from people talking. The reporters never left the safety and security of the battalion CP.
And it's again worth noting that for a battle of its length and intensity, it's surprising how few photos we actually have of it, right? The ones that you've seen were taken by those two AP photographers at the LZ. And dramatic photos, and I'm glad we have them. But you're not really seeing anything beyond the headquarters, the LZ there. And likewise, the reports they're getting back. I mean, they're talking soldiers coming back. You can imagine. I mean, you've been, you've gotten like 3 hours of sleep in the past 5 days, and you're wounded and everything else, and you come back and the report says, "So what was it like?" Who knows what comes out of your mouth? You're probably be like, "Oh, it's terrible." Well, of course it's terrible. But the report, "Oh, really?" Like Frank Baccia, it's funny. He for years apparently he insisted that he never had, during or after the battle had ever really talked to anyone about it. We've got his Vietnam interview tape they did with him right after the battle in our archives. I'm like, that? He's like, but he was so completely out of his head, right, with exhaustion and everything else. He didn't even remember having that interview. So again, this is sometimes the danger of the parachuting in to get a story and not understanding the context. Yes?
I was at the battalion headquarters, and I wish to confirm what this gentleman said. Zayas and Wright, and all these reporters were just wandering around with chickens, like chickens around the battalion headquarters. What pictures they took were almost like posed pictures of people that were in around the perimeter, but they never stepped foot off of that ridge line to go into battle.
Right.
And I also have a question. Did you ever mention about the fact of the resupply of the NBA during the battle from layoffs by truck at nighttime, because what I witnessed, along with General Honeycutt, of hundreds of Vietnamese North NVA trucks going back and forth across the Laotian border, and obviously they're taking supplies to the battle and carrying back bodies and wounded to minimize the body count.
Okay, yes, the 29th Regiment had 3 battalions plus support companies, right? So the 7th and the 8th were the ones fighting in the hill. The 9th was one of those at the bottom, but in fact the 9th was spending a lot of its time doing logistical work. And this is a fact in this part of the country. The enemy rear service troops were actually pretty minimal. So it was often the soldiers who were actually carrying the ammunition, the wounded, everything back. So the 9th was in fact, at night. The trucks, again, I'd be curious to dig down on that, because the way the trucks could get across the border was Route 922, which was to the north. Now, it's also possible that they would have had a concealed fording area where the trucks would have gone a very short distance, and that's possible. So, and I know the reports when some of the initial searches went on, A Company, some of these others, you going through the jungle and suddenly you walk into this little highway, right, with the trees over it. They're very good in concealment. So, I believe what you're saying, because through most of the battle, that's how they're getting the extra ammo. That's how they're taking dead and wounded and bringing in fresh troops. It's around the 16th when that system begins to break down. But yes, absolutely, and that's part of the reason they chose the hill where it was, because it was so close. So yeah, so they're at night, they're resupplying and getting right across the border. Yeah.
Just to pick up on that, if I could,
Sure.
real quick. A lot of us participated in the opening of Airborne, Warehouse 54 area. I don't know how familiar you are with that. But that's a place you could see the trucks driving up and down the highway at night, like it was Interstate 45 or whatever. When they hear the planes come over, they turn off their lights. The planes would leave, they turn on their lights and drive up and down the highway. But that was I didn't see it from the Long-Apia side, but I sure saw it from the Airborne side.
And again, those big troms that I mentioned, had a couple of transportation battalions and had these Soviet, made trucks. And you see, if you can conduct operations, destroy those trucks, force them out, it's a lot more laborious to carry things across in your back than load it on a truck. And that's part of the success of what you did. Sure.
Yes, I was always under the impression that they led us up to that hill. Everything from, I was the first company to go into the air assault and immediately started getting this sniper fire from a recon platoon. And of course we did what the Army does, we attacked it and we ran after it. My point, for example, saw one of them run down a little finger and B Company right behind me. And they assault up the main ridge line. And where they do that becomes the battalion CD. And they hit them 50 meters into it. And that's a hell of a fight.
Yep.
That first. So
Yeah.
it's just like they were pulling us up there. And we were going to
sure.
do what we do.
Oh yeah.
Attack.
Again, they couldn't be they couldn't be exactly sure where your LZs were and which battalions would land, but they knew that you were going to be in the area, whether yours or another one. And again, because the way that the Hill 937 is, it almost doesn't matter which direction you come in. From their point of view, it's about all the same. So they're like, okay, you land there, send out a couple scouts, bang, bang, bang. You guys come check it out. And so yeah, absolutely, you're drawing them in. And it just, I think you probably thought about this, but especially the guys who were there early, you're walking the trail, you had about 2,000 pairs of eyes, watching you the whole time from these little bunkers and everything, and they're just waiting. So they had a panoramic view, and when you landed, and they're counting the helicopters and who's coming off, and yep. Sir.
In view of the massive air superiority that we had absolute air supremacy. Once the basic headquarters unit was discovered, why in the world did we not have our troops fall back and blast that hill into a valley?
Right, and that's one of the sort of perennial questions. The answer would be, I think, basically this. The question, well, why didn't we use like a B-52 arc light strike, right? And just pulverize that hill. Well, the problem with that is that, minimum safe distance for a B-52 strike, is, 3 or 4 clicks, right? And you're obviously, you can't pull 3 or 4 clicks back into Laos, so that means going the other direction into the valley. So to get those American troops off the hill, whether you march or have helicopters or whatever, that's going to take time. And they're going to see you going. And if you're going, they're going to realize, oh, something's up. And they're just going to pull back. And you're not going to get anybody. And then there's another argument to be made. Well, what about using those 15,000-pound bunker busters? Well, fortunately, they only had a few of them in theater. They were testing them, but they didn't have them available. So what they ended up doing, and probably the most effective, were these 1,000-pound delayed fuse, which were being carried by tactical air. I mean, B-52s are actually carrying 500-pound bombs. So your attack air was using heavier stuff, and probably with more accuracy. But bottom line is, there would have been no good way to get those troops off the hill in sufficient time in order to actually then bag the unit. In fact, you look to the Yadrang Valley, we were soldiers once and young, in Halmore. After that fight at X-Ray, that's kind of what they did. Okay, we're going to march away from here, and we're going to bomb the living snot out of this whole area. Well, 2nd Battalion, 7th Cavalry, right, marching through the jungle for its pickup at LZ Albany, gets ambushed, right? You didn't know that there may have been other North troops out there. For the idea of you walk away and get off scot-free, that wasn't necessarily a solution either. So I think that's kind of probably the answer.
Well, once again, here you have this major communication center, it's a major headquarters area. Even if your troops pull back and they don't run them off, you're going to destroy that structure they had there.
Oh, yeah. So it actually, the thing is, and this is the interesting about particularly NVA units, their command group is literally those guys at the table in the 15-watt radio. I mean, there wasn't like sophisticated command and control. There wasn't infrastructure on the hill. The command group, the regimental commander, is actually in Laos. He's across the border. He's talking to his guys, either the radio or through runners. So the command group, the regimental headquarters, isn't even on the hill. It's just the fighting troops.
But there's still the coordination there.
Yeah.
And if we knock that out, they're going to set it up somewhere else, obviously, but they won't be able to build that defensive structure that they had on Hamburger Hill. So even if they went somewhere else and put it there, we could do
well,
much better.
Here's the thing. This is another problem with leaving the valley open for 2 years. They had lots of time to build this stuff all over the valley. And so the positions they occupied in Hamburger Hill, a lot of those are stuff that they built over the last 2 years. And there were lots of other places, lots of other hills that they could do the same thing, move in, fix it up a little bit, ready to go. So again, if it had been a sort of a real sunk cost, like sort of a mini Pentagon, that would definitely make sense. But it's literally a bunch of holes in the side of the hill and guys with weapons. I mean, that's basically what it was.
something, I don't know how it's gonna be construed on the 1st. I have no, obviously, no intentions to embarrass anybody, but was there an edict or some kind of command at the 101st after Hamburger Hill because of the bad, feelings that we would avoid any further contact directly with the enemy?
Nope, never, not for a second, wouldn't happen, didn't happen. And like I said, just look at the operations that happened afterwards, and you get, again, Firebase Ripcord in June of '70, where they're, so, and then you have all these other cyber attacks that take place in between. Absolutely not for a moment. I would never have been suggested. Again, I think this is sort of a myth that has kind of grown up outside of military circles, and to try to kind of understand the significance of the battle, but that's absolutely not the case. And I have read all the messages from Abrams and Zace and all the other commanders in the Navy. Yep.
Can I make a comment?
Oh, sure. Yes.
I know there are several of us involved in the group here. I talked to a couple yesterday. You mentioned 3rd Marine Division being involved in the whole situation, not Hamburger Hill itself.
Right.
The overall picture.
Mm-hmm.
As of July of '68, they had Army help. We were attached to the 3rd West Brigade, 5th Division, and not mechanized, only 1st 61st State mechanized.
Mm-hmm.
And since we all had the same bureau state, we were infused with other divisions, which is why a few of us in this group ended up going to the 101st at the beginning of '69, and also ended up on Hamburger Hill.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, this operation took place under control of 24 Corps Headquarters, which was an Army-led command. The deputy was a Marine, but it was an Army-led command under 3MAF, 3rd Marine. So this was an Army control headquarters that actually controlled 3rd Marine Division, 101st, and the 1st to 5th mechanized, which had infantry and mech and armor. And the 1st to the 5th, again, is a unit that's not often remembered or recognized in the Vietnam War, but doing some seriously heavy fighting along the DMZ and the lowlands. I mean, really just all over the place. But absolutely, I actually see this part of the war, 68 to 70, as being a real triumph of Marine Army cooperation. And in fact, I've got a grad student that I'm getting him in the dissertation on it. But the amount of cooperation actually is pretty amazing, and it's refreshing. Gives you hope.
I'd just like to make a comment about the Ho Chi Minh Trail. I'm one of the 12,000 deployed in. I'm one of the 12,000 that deployed in December 1st of 1967 with the division. And up until March 31st, when President Johnson made his announcement that he would not seek the presidency and that he would stop all the bombing in the North Vietnam, across the DMZ, and then the supposed neutral countries of Cambodia and Laos. After that date, we started taking very heavy casualties. Now, the one thing I learned when I was a private in 1966 here at Fort Campbell training was the first thing you do is you cut the supply route. And we felt abandoned, because we were really taking some heavy casualties all the way up to that. So I'm sure it had I didn't go up Hamburger Hill, but I'm sure a lot of these guys from Hamburger Hill was affected from that decision, because if they had done their job over there, they wouldn't have all the casualties.
It's true that, and Johnson calls it bombing halt, although it's important to note that the bombing halt was above the 20th parallel. So in fact, some of those assets were actually redirected towards the Ho Chi Minh Trail and Laos. I mean, they weren't bombing the areas around, Haiphong and Hanoi, but they were redoubling their efforts along those infiltration routes. But as you say, the decision ultimately was not to give Westmoreland the authority to launch this operation known as El Paso, which would have gone into Laos. And maybe that's why the Americans temporarily abandoned Quezon in the summer of '68. Not to defeat or anything, but it just wasn't worth the trouble at this point if the cross-border wasn't going to happen. So, Operation Lamson 719, right? February 1971, when they do cross the border, where do they launch from? Quezon. So again, there's a certain imperative from the Northeast point of view. They're not just trying to build infiltration routes this way, they're worried about us coming the other direction, right? And so a lot of these operations, are designed to kind of forestall that because they were concerned. What's wrong? I have a lot of admiration for him, but he's an Eagle Scout. He's very correct. But you read some of these back channel messages, you say, Rusty, I hardly knew you. He's like, well, can we kind of just slip across the border and whack them and just to pretend that we got the grid coordinates wrong? I mean, even he's like, let's give me authority to do this, because he understands from a strategic point of view the importance of that. One more question?
For the first 10 minutes that we came in here, maybe almost 15 minutes, there was a picture up on the wall of 3 soldiers shooting. I believe one of those guys is here right now.
Really?
That was from the cover of Sam Zafiri's Hamburger Hill.
Yeah.
And if you could get to that picture, if the man would volunteer to stand up, if he doesn't, I'll say his name. Yeah. Is our volunteer there?
Right there, although we have reached the 11:30 hour, so it is time to allow everyone the opportunity to get some lunch at the buffet down the hall. We are in this room for the rest of the day, so if you want to eat down there in the restaurant area, you certainly can. This room is available as well to eat and continue to socialize. We invite Dr. Villard, and hopefully he will stay for lunch, and I'm sure he'd be happy to continue to answer questions. Before he goes, in the Army, we always like to give a gift as our way of saying thanks. And frankly, we all know what this is. This is the Tory, the symbol that represents who we are and the history of this fine unit. But I like to think this one is extra special, I guess is the best way I could say it. If I could get Chuck to just kind of raise his hand and stand up there, please. This is from Chuck Van Lugren. Prison yesterday, and so this is a handcrafted Tory by Chuck, a Hamburger Hill veteran, and we're going to present this to Dr. Villard today to say thanks for his efforts here. So, Dr. Villard. We're going to ask him to display that proudly on his desk or everywhere it can be seen at the Center for Military History, and to establish one more foothold for the Rockets-on somewhere else. Okay, one final round of applause. Thank you all for coming. You got Bob, you got something to say?
What time are we going to reassemble? 13:30?
Somebody tell me, 1300? 1300 for Oliver North War Stories right here. So thanks for coming, everybody.